when the ego is controlling your life, everything goes wrong. Because when you're in the ego state, usually you make decisions from anxiety, from fear and worry, and you don't want to be making decisions from that place. Because when you're making decisions of temporary emotions of anxiety, fear, and worry, usually you make the wrong choices in life. Usually you're not doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, and there's going to be negative consequences to those decisions that are coming from a place of anxiety, fear, and worry. Okay, so what is the ego? What is the ego? Because we use this word a lot. Everybody uses this word, but everybody has different meanings for this word. This word has different meanings to different people. But when I read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, my whole perspective changed on what the ego really is. And in that book, what I learned is that the ego is really the sense of self that you have. All right. And what the ego is, in a very simple put way, is that the ego is when you have a lack of observation of your thoughts, when you're unconsciously identified with the thinking that is going on in your mind. When you're very attached to the story that is playing in your head, when you're very attached to every single thought that goes on, and you believe in it to be who you are, right? And then you make decisions from that place. That is what the ego really is. The ego is when you are unconsciously identified with your thinking. Okay, what does this mean? It means that you're going through life and you have thoughts that are playing in your head, that you think that's who you are, and you're making decisions, but you're unconscious of those thoughts. You don't even realize that you're having them. And you don't have enough presence within you to observe that thinking, those thought patterns that are going on in your head. And they are just patterns, okay? They're not who you are, but they are simply patterns that are playing in your head. And when you believe those patterns to be who you are, and you're not realizing that they are there in that moment, because something might be going on in your life where, there's a lot of, stimulus. It might be a very stimulating environment. And then you kind of get lost in your thinking. Then when you get lost in that thinking, that is the ego. That is the ego. When you have a lack of observation of the thinking mind, the ego is controlling your life. But the moment you begin to observe your thoughts, so when I started to observe my thoughts 3 years ago in meditation, I started to become very aware of the ego and what's going on in my mind. I started to become very aware of thought patterns that were going on in my head, that I thought that's who I was. I took those thoughts as an identity. I created a sense of self. Like, okay, I might have a thought pattern that says, let me give you an example, like, I am not confident, or I'm an introverted person, right? Or I don't like this. Like, that's just how I am. I don't like these, this kind of music, right? You create a sense of self. And the moment you do that, you limit yourself and you put yourself in a box, because that is not who you really are, but it is a pattern that is going on in your head. And if you're not conscious and aware of that pattern, and usually there's a lot of stories that are connected to these patterns in your head as well, and you follow that story and you take it with you into life situations, that is the ego, and that is controlling your life. And as long as that part of you, that unconscious part of you, is controlling your life, you're never going to be able to become the true person that you're meant to be, right? Your true self, your higher self. You're never going to be able to become that real, authentic, raw version of you that you want to be, as long as you're attached to these stories and these concepts and all this, stuff going on, all the stuff that's going on in your head. So that is the ego. All right, it goes really deep, but that is a simple explanation for what the ego is. And if you connect that even back to the normal way people see the word ego, because this is a very advanced explanation. Like, usually when people say ego, they think of like somebody that has a very strong sense of self. They have a lot of pride in them, right? But if you think about what I just said and you combine that to the average definition of what the ego is, it makes perfect sense, because when you combine those two things, that normal explanation of the ego is actually the same thing. Because when you're attached to your thinking, what do you think happens to a person and their sense of pride and how they view themselves, thinking that they're better than everybody else? Because as long as you attach this identity as long as you create an identity around your thinking and the thoughts, which doesn't make any sense. You can't create an identity around your thoughts. It's just patterns that are always changing. As long as you create an identity around that, you're going to start to develop that, false sense of pride. And even if there's a little bit of confidence in that, there's a lot of insecurities in there too, right? That person has a lot of insecurities. Maybe they have that macho pride in that very egotistical state. And you maybe even you think you want to be like that. But how many insecurities do you think they have? But when you let go of the ego, the insecurities go away too. And you become who you really are supposed to be. All right, so that is what the ego is. It's when you're unconsciously identified with your thinking, when you have a lack of observation with your thinking. Because when I started to observe my thoughts 3 years ago, and I started applying this to my everyday life, and I started to have less ego. When I say less ego, I mean more observation of my thinking. My whole life began to completely change. I became more confident. I would have better eating habits because I'd start to observe the patterns that are going on in my head. And so when you make decisions from a place of being calm without the ego, everything in your life will begin to work in a much, much better, more efficient, more productive, more happy way. Everything will be much, much better. All right, so if you guys are new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you like this content. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and most importantly, hit that notification bell so you guys can actually get notifications for my videos that I post every single day. So have yourself a great day and see you guys in the next video.